The engine made one final, shuddering gasp before falling silent. Claire Whitman gripped the steering wheel of her vintage blue sedan, staring at the steam rising from beneath the hood like incense from a broken prayer. The Kansas sun beat mercilessly through her windshield, and the silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the world had stopped breathing along with her car. She'd been driving for 2 days straight, fleeing the wreckage of her marriage in California with nothing but a hastily packed trunk and her sister's address in Missouri. The endless ribbon of Route 66 had seemed like salvation itself, promising anonymity and distance from David's suffocating control. Now 15 miles from nowhere, with her phone showing no signal and her water bottle empty, that salvation felt more like a cruel joke. Claire closed her eyes, fighting back the tears that had been threatening since she'd left Sacramento. She wouldn't cry. Not here, not now, not when she'd come so far. But the heat was becoming unbearable, and the highway stretched empty in both directions, like a testament to her isolation. That's when she saw it in her rearview mirror, a red toolbox moving purposefully along the shoulder, carried by hands she couldn't yet see. The sight was so unexpected, so impossible, that for a moment she wondered if the heat was making her hallucinate. She hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't seen another vehicle. The toolbox simply appeared, as if conjured by desperation itself. "Ma'am, you might want to step away from the car," came a deep voice from behind her. "That's not engine trouble you're smelling." Claire spun around to see a man approaching, his face shadowed by the brim of a weathered baseball cap. He was tall and lean, with the kind of quiet competence that came from years of fixing things that others had given up on. His work shirt bore the faded logo of Mitchell's Auto Repair, and his boots had the worn look of someone who spent his days on hot asphalt and gravel. "I'm sorry, what?" Claire managed, still processing his sudden appearance. Tom Mitchell set down his toolbox and gestured toward her car. "That sweet smell, that's coolant burning. Mixed with this heat, it could turn dangerous fast." He kept his distance, noting her California plates and the way her eyes darted between him and the empty road. He'd seen that look before, the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust unexpected kindness. Claire reluctantly stepped away from her car, and Tom moved to lift the hood. Steam billowed out, confirming his diagnosis. He studied the engine with the methodical attention of someone who understood that every breakdown told a story. "Radiator hose," he said, straightening up. "Plus your coolant reservoir is bone dry. When's the last time you had this looked at?" "3 days ago," Claire replied, confusion creeping into her voice. The mechanic in Sacramento said everything was fine. Tom's expression darkened slightly, but he didn't comment. Instead, he walked around the vehicle, noting details. The hurried way clothes were packed in the back seat, the wedding ring tan line on her finger. The fact that she was traveling alone on a route most people avoided these days. "I've got a tow truck about a mile back," he said finally. "I'll get you into town, get this sorted out. But I have to tell you something strange. You're the 4th car to break down in this exact spot this month." Claire felt a chill despite the heat. "What do you mean?" Tom loaded her belongings into his truck with careful efficiency. "This stretch of road has a reputation," he said, securing her car to the tow. "People don't just break down here by accident. They break down when they're meant to stop running." The words hung in the air like a prophecy as they drove toward Millbrook, and Claire found herself wondering if her breakdown was really as random as it seemed. Through the truck's window, she watched her disabled car following behind, and for the first time since leaving California, she felt something other than fear. It might have been curiosity, or it might have been hope, but either way, it was better than the emptiness that had been consuming her for months. Millbrook appeared on the horizon like a mirage, its water tower and church steeple rising from the prairie with the stubborn optimism of small-town America. Main Street was lined with brick buildings that had weathered decades of economic uncertainty, and Mitchell's Auto Repair sat squarely in the middle of it all, adjacent to Ruby's Diner, with its cheerful red awning and promise of homemade pie. Tom backed her car into the garage bay with practiced ease. "I'll need to order a part," he explained, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Could take 2 days, maybe 3. Claire's face went pale. She'd been careful with money during her escape, but 2 nights in a motel would drain most of her cash reserves. Tom noticed her checking her wallet with barely concealed panic, the same desperate mathematics he'd seen too many times before. "Tell you what," he said as if the idea had just occurred to him. "Ruby next door needs someone to help with the evening cleanup. She's got a room upstairs she sometimes rents to travelers. Work for room and board if you're interested." Claire looked through the garage window at the diner, where she could see an older woman with silver hair moving efficiently between tables. The offer seemed too convenient, too perfectly timed, but her alternatives were limited. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Tom shrugged, but there was something guarded in his expression. "Sometimes people need a place to catch their breath. This town's good for that." An hour later, Claire found herself wearing a borrowed apron, learning the rhythm of Ruby's diner from its namesake owner. Ruby Castellanos had the sharp eyes and gentle manner of someone who'd spent 40 years reading the stories written on travelers' faces. "Honey," Ruby said, watching Claire arrange silverware with the precise attention of someone trying to prove their worth. "Every woman who's ever stopped running has passed through this garage first." The comment made Claire pause. "What do you mean?" Ruby's smile held secrets. "Tom's got a gift for showing up when people's cars decide they've had enough of the road. Funny how that works." That evening, after the last customer had left and the diner was spotless, Claire climbed the narrow stairs to her temporary room above the garage. It was small but clean, with a window that looked out over Main Street and the endless prairie beyond. She was exhausted, but sleep seemed impossible. Too much had changed too quickly, and Tom's words about the road having a reputation kept echoing in her mind. She was preparing for bed when she noticed something white beneath her door. A handwritten note, folded neatly. "Some secrets in this town are worth knowing. Meet me at the old church at midnight if you want answers about your car. A friend." Claire stared at the note, her heart hammering. The smart thing would be to ignore it, to lock her door and wait for morning. But intelligence had never been her strongest trait when curiosity was involved, and the mystery of her breakdown was beginning to feel like the first chapter of a story she needed to understand. At 11:30 that night, Claire found herself walking through Millbrook's empty streets toward the abandoned Methodist church on the town's outskirts. The old building stood silhouetted against the star-filled Kansas sky, its broken windows like hollow eyes watching her approach. She told herself she was being foolish, that meeting an anonymous note writer in a deserted church was exactly the kind of decision that got people into serious trouble. But the mystery of her breakdown had been gnawing at her all evening, and sleep would be impossible until she had answers. The church door creaked open at her touch, revealing an interior stripped of pews and decoration. Moonlight streamed through the damaged roof, creating pools of silver on the dusty floor. Claire waited, listening to the settling sounds of old wood and her own racing heartbeat. Minutes passed. No one came. She was about to leave when something caught her eye near the altar, loose boards that didn't quite align with the others. Driven by curiosity that had always been both her blessing and her curse, Claire pried at the boards until they gave way, revealing a hidden space behind the wall. Inside were dozens of letters and photographs, all carefully preserved in plastic bags. Claire's hands trembled as she pulled them out and began reading by the light of her phone. Each letter was from a different woman, dated over the past 5 years. Each told the same story: a breakdown on Route 66, rescue by Tom Mitchell, an unexpected stay in Millbrook that had turned into something permanent. "Dear Sarah," read one letter, "you asked me to write when I found what I was looking for. I found it in a small town I'd never heard of, with a man who fixes more than just cars. Tom showed me that sometimes the best thing that can happen is getting stranded exactly where you need to be." Another letter spoke of Tom's gentle kindness, his way of making people feel safe without asking questions. A third mentioned how he'd helped a woman escape an abusive situation by providing her with a reliable car and a fresh start. But as Claire read deeper into the collection, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every woman mentioned the same thing. Their cars had broken down in the exact same spot where hers had failed. "You weren't supposed to find those." Claire spun around to find Tom standing in the doorway, his face unreadable in the shadows. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she clutched the letters. "These women," she said, her voice barely steady. "Did you sabotage their cars too?" Tom's expression hardened, and for the first time since meeting him, Claire felt genuinely afraid. He stepped into the church, and she instinctively backed away. Claire, you need to leave Millbrook. Tonight. Before you understand what's really happening here. His words carried a weight that made her blood run cold. She thought of her disabled car, of how perfectly timed his appearance had been, of Ruby's knowing comments about women who stopped running. The pieces were forming a picture she didn't want to see. "What did you do to my car?" she whispered. Tom looked at the letters scattered around her, then back at her face. "Get your things. I'll drive you to the highway. You can catch a bus from there." But Claire had spent too many years running from uncomfortable truth, and something in his urgency made her dig in her heels. "No. I want answers first." "The answers will only make things worse," Tom said quietly. "Trust me." Claire stared at him, this man who had appeared like salvation when she needed it most, who had shown her kindness when she expected nothing, and realized she didn't know him at all. The romantic possibility she'd been carefully nurturing crumbled into dust, replaced by the familiar taste of betrayal. Dawn found Claire sitting at the counter in Ruby's diner, the letters spread before her like evidence in a case she was trying to solve. She hadn't slept, hadn't returned to her room above the garage. Instead, she'd spent the remaining hours of darkness reading every single letter, trying to understand what kind of operation Tom was running and how many women had fallen victim to it. Ruby arrived to open the diner and found Claire there, her eyes red with exhaustion and unshed tears. "You found the letters," Ruby said simply, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "How many women has he done this to?" Claire asked. Ruby studied her for a long moment, then sat down across from her. "Honey, I think you've got the story backwards." "Then tell me the right story." Ruby sighed, the sound heavy with years of keeping secrets. "Tom's been fixing that same stretch of road for 7 years. There's a pothole there, hidden by a rise in the asphalt. The county won't repair it because it's technically state jurisdiction, and the state won't fix it because they say it's county responsibility. Meanwhile, cars keep getting damage." Claire frowned. "But the letters—" "Those women chose to stay," Ruby interrupted. "Tom never asked them to, never pressured them. They fell in love with this town, with the community, with the idea of belonging somewhere. Some of them fell in love with Tom too, but that wasn't his doing." "But there's something else," Ruby continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Something Tom hasn't told you about why he really stays in this town." Before Claire could ask what she meant, the diner's bell chimed. Sheriff's Deputy Margaret Hayes entered, her expression grim. She nodded to Claire but went straight to Ruby. "Ruby, I need to speak with you privately." Claire couldn't help but overhear fragments of their hushed conversation. "The federal investigators are coming back. If they find out Tom's been helping people. This time they'll arrest him for sure." The coffee in Claire's stomach turned to acid. Whatever Tom was involved in, it was serious enough to bring federal attention to their small town. She thought of his urgent warning the night before, his insistence that she leave immediately. Maybe he hadn't been threatening her. Maybe he'd been trying to protect her. When Deputy Hayes left, Claire cornered Ruby. "What federal investigators?" Ruby looked older suddenly, worn down by the weight of secrets. "You need to talk to Tom about that. But Claire, whatever you think you know about him, you're probably wrong." Claire found Tom in his apartment above the garage, sitting at a small kitchen table with a cup of untouched coffee growing cold before him. He looked up when she knocked, unsurprised to see her there. "I talked to Ruby," she said. Tom nodded. "I figured you would." "She said I have the story wrong, so tell me the right one." Tom was quiet for so long that Claire wondered if he would answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of confession. 3 years ago, a woman named Sarah came through town. She was running from her ex-husband, a man with money, connections, and a violent temper. Her kids were with her, scared and traumatized. Her car broke down on that same stretch of road, and I helped her the way I've helped everyone else. But when I learned what she was running from, I did more than fix her car." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. "I gave her money for a new start. I helped her get new identification papers through some contacts I'd made during my time in the military. I made sure she had a reliable car that wouldn't break down when she needed it most. Claire felt her understanding of the situation shifting again. That's not illegal. Her ex-husband is a congressman, Tom continued. When Sarah disappeared with the kids, he used his connections to launch a federal investigation. He claimed I'd aided in kidnapping, that I was running some kind of operation to help women steal children from their fathers. The truth didn't matter. He had the power to make my life hell. Tom turned back to face her, and Claire saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of living under constant scrutiny. The investigators have been watching this town on and off for 3 years. Every time someone new comes through, every time I help a stranded traveler, they wonder if I'm up to my old tricks. That's why you need to leave, Claire. Not because I'm dangerous, but because associating with me puts you in danger. Claire stared at him, processing this new version of events. So you really are just helping people? I fix cars, Tom said simply. Sometimes I fix other things too, when they're broken and I know how. But I'm not some predator targeting vulnerable women. I'm just a mechanic who can't drive past someone who needs help. Claire moved closer to him, close enough to see the sincerity in his eyes, the way his hands shook slightly as he spoke. Show me, she said. Show you what? Show me the photos. Tom looked confused, so Claire clarified. In the letters, some of the women mentioned photos. Photos of their cars before the breakdown. Photos that prove what really happened. Tom's face went pale. He walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder, his movements reluctant. Inside were photographs of dozens of cars, all showing the same type of damage. Undercarriage destruction, consistent with hitting a hidden road hazard. But as Claire flipped through the photos, one made her blood freeze. It was her car, but not as it looked now. In the photo, her blue sedan was pristine, parked outside what looked like a courthouse. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 years ago. Tom, she whispered, I think I know why my car really broke down here. He leaned over her shoulder to look at the photo, and his expression grew grim. Your ex-husband, he said quietly. He hired someone to sabotage your car. He wanted you stranded, vulnerable. The question is, how did he know you'd take this route? Claire and Tom spent the next 2 hours piecing together a puzzle that grew more sinister with each discovery. Using her laptop and the diner's Wi-Fi, they traced David's digital footprint through old emails and credit card statements she'd forgotten to close. The pattern was chilling. He'd been tracking her movements for months before she left California, monitoring her internet searches, her gas station purchases, even her library checkouts. Look at this, Claire said, pointing to a series of charges on David's credit card. 3 different auto shops in Sacramento, all in the week before I left. And here, she scrolled through her email trash folder. He forwarded my Route 66 travel research to someone, an email address I don't recognize. Tom studied the screen, his jaw tightening. He sabotaged your car's cooling system before you even left California. Timed it so you'd break down in the middle of nowhere, where you'd be desperate enough to call him for help. The realization hit Claire like a physical blow. Her escape, her moment of courage and independence, had been orchestrated by the very person she was fleeing. David had been counting on her calling him, begging him to rescue her, proving that she couldn't survive without him. There's more, Tom said grimly, pulling up a web page on his phone. Your ex-husband isn't just tracking you. Look at this missing persons report he filed. Claire's blood turned to ice as she read David's carefully crafted lies. According to the report, she was mentally unstable, possibly suicidal, and had stolen their joint assets before disappearing. He'd painted himself as the concerned husband desperately searching for his troubled wife. He's been building a case, Claire whispered, making it look like I'm the unstable one. Tom's phone rang, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. He looked at the caller ID, and his face went white. It's him, Tom said. Your ex-husband. Claire stared at the phone, paralyzed. Tom answered on the 4th ring. Mr. Mitchell, came David's smooth voice through the speaker, loud enough for Claire to hear. I think it's time we met. My wife needs to come home, and you need to stop interfering in my marriage. 1 hour, or I call the federal agents about your little underground railroad operation. The line went dead, leaving them in silence, heavy with threat and implication. Exactly 1 hour later, a black rental sedan pulled up outside Mitchell's auto repair. David Whitman emerged looking every inch the successful businessman, pressed suit, confident smile, and a briefcase that suggested he'd come prepared for legal battle. He'd brought backup too, a second man in an expensive suit who had the bearing of either a lawyer or private security. Tom met them on the sidewalk while Claire watched from the diner window, her heart hammering. Word had spread quickly through Millbrook's tight-knit community, and a small crowd had gathered. Ruby, Deputy Hayes, the pharmacy owner, and several other townspeople who'd grown protective of their quiet mechanic. "Mr. Mitchell," David said, extending a hand that Tom didn't take. "Thank you for taking care of my wife. She's been under tremendous stress lately, and I'm afraid she's not thinking clearly." David's performance was masterful. He spoke with the concerned authority of a man trying to help his troubled spouse, pulling legal documents from his briefcase that claimed Tom had been holding Claire against her will. To anyone who didn't know the full story, David appeared to be the reasonable party trying to reclaim his mentally unstable wife from a potentially dangerous stranger. "Claire is free to make her own choices," Tom said quietly. "Is she?" David's smile never wavered, but his eyes were cold. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you've isolated a vulnerable woman, convinced her that her loving husband is the enemy, and trapped her in this godforsaken town. That sounds like textbook manipulation to me." Claire emerged from the diner, unable to watch from the sidelines any longer. David's face lit up with what looked like genuine relief and love, and for a moment, even Claire found herself questioning her own memories. He was so convincing, so perfectly reasonable, that she almost believed his version of events herself. "Claire, sweetheart," David said, moving toward her. "I've been so worried. When you disappeared like that, when you stopped taking my calls, I thought something terrible had happened to you." "Something terrible did happen to me," Claire said, finding her voice. "I married you." David's mask slipped for just an instant, revealing the cold fury beneath, before snapping back into place. "You're not well, Claire. This man has filled your head with paranoid fantasies. Come home with me, and we'll get you the help you need." It was then that Claire noticed something that changed everything. David's rental car was parked at an angle that revealed its undercarriage, and a small pool of green coolant was forming beneath the engine. "Tom," she said quietly, pointing to the leak, "look at his car." Tom followed her gaze and his expression grew grim. The rental car had the same type of coolant leak that had disabled Claire's sedan, the kind of damage that would cause a breakdown within hours of driving. "David," Tom said, his voice dangerously quiet, "show us your toolbox." "I don't know what you're talking about," David replied, but his confidence was beginning to crack. "The one in your trunk, the one you've been using to sabotage cars belonging to women who've left abusive relationships. Because Claire isn't your first victim, is she?" Deputy Hayes stepped forward, her hand moving instinctively toward her service weapon. "Mr. Whitman, I think we need to take a look at that vehicle." What they found in David's trunk was damning, a toolkit specifically designed for automotive sabotage, along with files on 3 other women across different states. Each file contained personal information, travel patterns, and detailed plans for disabling their vehicles in remote locations. David had been following a pattern across the state lines, systematically hunting down women who'd escaped abusive relationships and orchestrating their breakdown in places where they'd be vulnerable and isolated. 20 minutes later, inside the Millbrook Sheriff's Station, the truth finally came to light. Deputy Hayes had contacted authorities in California and Nevada who confirmed that David was wanted in connection with several cases of stalking and automotive sabotage. His missing persons report on Claire was revealed to be part of a broader pattern of harassment designed to discredit his victims and maintain control over them, even after they'd left. "The divorce papers came through this morning," Deputy Hayes told Claire, sliding an overnight envelope across her desk. "Turns out your husband has been lying about your legal status too. According to the state of California, you've been officially divorced for 3 weeks." Claire stared at the documents, hardly able to process that her nightmare was finally ending. David had been lying about everything: their marriage, her mental state, even basic facts about their legal relationship. But as the adrenaline of the confrontation faded, the stress and exhaustion of the past few days caught up with her all at once. The station began to spin, her vision blurred, and the last thing she remembered was Tom calling her name as she collapsed. She woke up in a hospital bed with Tom holding her hand and reading aloud from something that made her smile despite her confusion. As her vision cleared, she realized he was reading from her journal, not the personal entries, but a list she'd written years ago and forgotten about. It was titled Places I Want to See Someday and included dozens of locations she dreamed of visiting, but had never been brave enough to explore during her marriage. The Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve, Tom was reading. Dodge City, the chalk pyramids of Monument Rocks. He looked up as she stirred. You've got good taste in Kansas landmarks. Claire tried to sit up, wincing at the IV in her arm. How long was I out? 6 hours. The doctor said it was exhaustion and dehydration, combined with emotional trauma. You need rest. What happened to David? Federal custody. Turns out the woman I helped 3 years ago, Sarah, finally found the courage to testify against her ex-husband. He was arrested yesterday for human trafficking. The federal investigator who's been watching me came to thank me, not arrest me. Apparently, my underground railroad saved more lives than I knew. Claire absorbed this information slowly, still struggling to believe that her ordeal was truly over. So you're not in trouble? Tom smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since they'd met. The opposite, actually. They've offered me a consulting position, helping set up legitimate safe routes for people escaping dangerous situations. It would mean traveling, working with law enforcement agencies across the country. That sounds like important work, Claire said carefully. It is, but it would also mean leaving Millbrook. Tom hesitated, then met her eyes directly. I told them I'd only consider it if someone I trust thinks I should take it. I've spent 3 years helping people pass through this town, but I've never met anyone I wanted to stop running with. Claire felt her heart skip, but she forced herself to think clearly. What if I told you I don't want to run anymore? What if I said I wanted to stay here and help people who break down on that road? Tom's smile widened. Then I'd say we make a pretty good team, and maybe we could do both. Help people here and help people out there, together. Through the hospital window, Claire could see the sun setting over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. For the first time in years, the future felt full of possibility rather than fear. 6 months later, Mitchell and Whitman Auto and Crisis Support had become a beacon for travelers in trouble. Claire taught part-time at Millbrook Elementary and helped run a resource center that provided everything from car repairs to counseling services. Tom had accepted the federal consulting position but worked remotely from their hometown, traveling only when cases required his presence. The stretch of road where Claire had broken down was finally properly repaired, but people still stopped at their garage. Now by choice, drawn by word of mouth about the small Kansas town that specialized in helping people rebuild their lives. On this particular afternoon, Claire was updating their website when she heard the familiar sound of a car pulling up with engine trouble. Through the window, she saw a young woman emerge from a sedan with out-of-state plates, looking frightened and lost. The woman had a black eye that makeup couldn't quite hide, and her hands shook as she lifted the hood to reveal steam rising from the engine. Claire and Tom exchanged a knowing glance through the garage bay door. Tom reached for his toolbox while Claire put the kettle on at Ruby's Diner, their established routine for welcoming new arrivals who might need more than just mechanical assistance. Some breakdowns, they'd learned, were exactly what people needed. As Claire walked outside to greet their newest visitor, she thought about fate and second chances, about the strange way the universe sometimes disguised its gifts as disasters. Her own breakdown had felt like the end of everything, but it had actually been the beginning of a life she'd never dared to imagine. The camera of memory pulled back to show the repaired road stretching toward the horizon, marked now by a new sign that read, Millbrook, population 847, a good place to stop running. In the distance, Claire could see Tom approaching the stranded woman with his toolbox and his quiet competence, ready to prove once again that sometimes the best thing that can happen is getting stranded exactly where you need to be.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please support the channel, subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments so you don't miss the next episodes. See you in the next story.